The estate kitchen smelled of burnt bread and desperation. Lyra Hayes had learned 3 years ago that survival meant becoming part of the walls, the worn flagstones, the shadows cast by oil lamps that never quite dispelled the gloom. Her hands moved through their nightly rhythm, scrubbing copper pots until her knuckles ached the methodical repetition, a kind of meditation. Thomas Reed leaned against the work table beside her, barely 19, and still naive enough to believe kindness mattered in a place like Thornwood Estate. His whisper cut through the clatter of dishes. "You're doing it again." Lyra kept her eyes on the pot, on the circular motion of her cloth against tarnished metal. "Doing what?" "That thing where you disappear. I swear one day you're going to fade into the walls completely." The observation landed closer to truth than he knew. She'd cultivated invisibility like others cultivated gardens. Careful pruning, constant attention, the patience to watch something grow from intention into instinct. That's the idea. 3 years here, and the trick is, the head cook's bark shattered their moment. Agatha Morrison ran her kitchen like a general ran a battlefield, and mercy was a luxury neither could afford. "Hey, stop gossiping, start working. Those herbs won't carry themselves to the beta's quarters." Lyra's hands stilled. The beta's quarters. Marcus Chen, second most powerful wolf in Thornwood territory, a man whose word could reshape lives with casual precision. Nobles didn't request specific servants. They summoned whoever was nearest and expected perfection from interchangeable hands. Thomas's eyes went wide. Even he understood the strangeness of it. "Why would Beta Chen want you specifically?" "I don't know. The head housekeeper said he asked for you by name, the quiet one who knows herbs." "That's you, right? Your grandmother taught you." The mention of her grandmother sent familiar pain rippling through her chest. 9 years since the old woman had died, leaving Lyra alone in a world that didn't care if she lived or vanished. The herbs had been her grandmother's legacy: fever, few for headaches, chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain. Simple remedies for simple problems. Nothing that should draw a beta's attention. "My grandmother knew plants. She taught me what she could before illness took her. Before Lyra became another orphaned omega drifting through territories looking for somewhere that might feel like home long enough to catch her breath." Thomas touched her arm, the gesture tentative. "Be careful up there. Noble floors are dangerous for our kind." Our kind. Omegas. The bottom rung of pack hierarchy, the ones who served and hoped that survival was enough. Lyra had stopped hoping for more than that 2 territories ago, in a town whose name she'd already forgotten. She gathered the basket of dried herbs, feverfew chamomile willow bark, and left the kitchen's familiar chaos for the servants' quarters. These narrow passages ran like veins through Thornwood Estate, allowing staff to move unseen between the grand rooms where nobility pretended servants materialized from thin air when needed. The walk to Marcus Chen's quarters took her past scenes of estate life she'd memorized over 3 years. Guards changing shift near the armory. Maids whispering about some scandal involving the Alpha's younger brother. The scent of expensive cologne drifting from the direction of the noble's wing, mixing uneasily with the utilitarian smell of lye soap and old stone. She'd learned that invisibility was the best survival strategy for an Omega working in the royal estate. Keep your head down, your voice soft, your movements quiet. Blend into the stone walls and wooden floors until the nobles forgot you existed. It had served her well, this self-imposed erasure. Until tonight. Marcus Chen's door stood slightly ajar, golden lamplight spilling into the dim corridor. Lyra knocked softly, the sound barely audible over her own heartbeat. She'd delivered supplies to nobles before, linens, to guest chambers, meals, to private dining rooms, but always to spaces, never to people. The distinction mattered in ways she couldn't quite articulate. No answer came. She knocked harder, her knuckles rapping against aged oak that had probably stood witness to 100 years of estate secrets. "Beta Chen may have the herbs you requested." Silence pressed against her ears, thick and wrong. Every instinct her grandmother had taught her screamed that something fundamental had shifted in the air, that the space beyond the door had become a place where bad things lived and breathed. The door drifted open under her touch, hinges whispering like conspirators. The smell hit her first. Copper and iron, thick and overwhelming, the scent of blood so fresh it hadn't yet congealed into something her mind could distance itself from. Her basket fell from nerveless fingers. Feverfew and chamomile scattered across the threshold like offerings at a shrine to violent times. Marcus Chen lay on the floor in a spreading pool of crimson that looked black in the lamplight. His tunic was soaked through multiple stab wounds visible, even as her mind tried desperately to make sense of any other explanation. His eyes were still open, still aware, and when they locked on to hers, desperate recognition flared in their depths. Lyra dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering uselessly over wounds too many and too deep to be anything but fatal. Training she didn't know she possessed took over. She pressed her palms against the worst wound, trying to stem the flow. Blood welled between her fingers, hot and relentless, alive in a way that made her stomach turn. Beta Chen, hold on. I'll get help. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. The grip was iron, desperate, the last attempt at communication before darkness took him. The words came out in broken gasps, each one costing him more than the last. Luna's bloodline. He coughed, blood flecking his lips, painting his teeth red. You need to run before they discover. Discover what? Who did this to you? His grip was already weakening, his eyes losing focus, the light behind them dimming like candles in a draft. He tried to speak again, his mouth forming shapes she couldn't quite decipher. Something about hiding, about danger, about bloodlines that should have stayed buried. Words that meant nothing and everything, a dying man's riddles that might have been prophecy or fever dream. The crystal, binding, must hide. You must! Then his hand fell away and the light left his eyes completely. Lyra sat frozen, her hands covered in his blood, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She needed to call for help, needed to find the guards, needed to do something other than kneel here beside a corpse in a spreading pool of crimson. The door slammed open behind her. 4 guards poured into the room, weapons drawn, and the scene they found was damning in its simplicity. Marcus Chen murdered in his own chambers. Lyra Hayes kneeling over his body, her hands and dress soaked in his blood. The lead guard's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Step away from him. I found him this way. I was trying to help. Step away now. Lyra raised her blood-slicked hands in surrender, scrambling backward, her mind racing through explanations that sounded hollow even to her own ears. She'd been alone with the body. She was covered in his blood. The evidence painted a story that her words couldn't erase. One of the younger guards circled around her position, and his sharp inhale made her stomach drop. Captain, there's a knife here. Under her apron. No, that was impossible. She hadn't brought a knife. She'd never even seen one before this moment. The guard held up a blade, its edge wet with blood, and Lyra understood with terrible clarity that someone had planned this perfectly. The timing, the evidence, her presence, well, I've never seen that before. Someone else was here. They must have... Rough hands grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back with enough force to make her gasp. Iron manacles clicked around her wrists, the cold metal biting into skin, already sticky with another man's blood. The weight of them felt like prophecy, like the universe declaring her guilty before any trial could pretend at justice. I didn't do this. Please, you have to believe me. I found him dying. I tried to help. The captain's expression might have been carved from the same stone as the estate walls. Save your lies for the interrogators. They dragged her from the room, her feet stumbling over the threshold, leaving bloody footprints on stone that would be scrubbed clean before morning, while she rotted in whatever hole they threw her into. Other servants had gathered in the hallway, their faces a mixture of shock and horror, and the peculiar satisfaction of witnessing someone else's fall. Thomas was there, his hand flying to his mouth, his eyes going wide with disbelief that couldn't quite bridge the gap to understanding. She met his gaze and saw her own helplessness reflected back. I didn't do this. Thomas, tell them. Tell them I wouldn't. The captain shoved her forward. Keep moving. The dungeon was everything nightmares were made of, and worse for being real. Damp stone walls that wept moisture in the flickering torchlight. The smell of old fear and older suffering, human waste and despair mixed into something that coated the back of her throat. Darkness so complete it pressed against her eyes even when she tried to hold them open. They threw her into a cell and locked the heavy door, the sound of the bolts sliding home, echoing in silence that felt alive. Lyra curled up on the thin layer of filthy straw that covered the floor, her blood-stained hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. Marcus had been alive when she entered the room, barely but alive. His killer must have fled just moments before she arrived. Someone had planned this with terrifying precision, had timed it perfectly to ensure she would be the one found at the scene, the only witness to a murder she hadn't committed. The hours bled together in darkness. Twice a day, guards came to question her, their methods growing progressively more brutal when she continued to maintain her innocence. They wanted her to confess, wanted her to explain why a lowly kitchen servant would murder one of the most powerful men in the territory. She had no answers that satisfied them because the truth sounded like desperation. On the third day, a priest came to her cell. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and a soft voice that seemed deliberately crafted to inspire trust. Everything about him felt wrong in ways Lyra couldn't articulate, like a painting that was perfect except for one color being slightly off. "Child, I'm here to offer you the comfort of confession. Whatever sins weigh upon your soul, the gods will grant forgiveness if you speak true." Lyra sat up slowly, her body aching from days on stone floor from interrogations that left bruises she couldn't see in the darkness. "I have nothing to confess, Father. I didn't kill Marcus Chen." The priest settled himself on a wooden stool just outside the bars, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne beneath the incense that clung to his robes. Too expensive for a traveling priest. The wrongness intensified. "Tell me what happened then. Sometimes speaking truth aloud can bring clarity." She told him everything, about the request for herbs, about finding Marcus dying, about the words he gasped before death took him. The priest listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful in a way that suggested he was cataloging information rather than offering spiritual comfort. "These words," he spoke, "Luna's bloodline. Do you know what they mean?" "No, Father, I don't know the old tongue." The priest leaned closer, and something in his voice changed, became sharper, more focused, the kindness sliding away like a mask removed when it was no longer needed. "Did he say anything else? Mention any names, places, objects of importance?" A chill ran down Lyra's spine despite the dungeon's oppressive heat. There was something wrong about his intensity, about the way his eyes had gone cold and calculating, despite the gentle tone he maintained. "No, he died before he could say more." The priest studied her for a long moment, and she felt him trying to read her emotions, to detect any lie hiding behind her exhaustion. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he smiled and it didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you, child. I think you're exactly what you appear to be, a simple servant caught in circumstances beyond her understanding." He stood brushing dust from his robes with careful precision. "May the gods grant you peace in whatever comes next." He left without offering any actual comfort or prayer, and Lyra's unease crystallized into certainty. That man had been searching for something specific, probing to see if Marcus had shared secrets before dying. Her ignorance had just saved her life, at least temporarily. 2 days later, everything changed. The cell door opened, and the dungeon master appeared with 2 guards flanking him like bookends. His announcement came without preamble, without mercy. "You're to be prepared for execution. AlphaKing has returned from the northern border and ordered judgment be carried out." Lyra's blood turned to ice in her veins. Went home 3 days hence, under the full moon. Prince Damon argued that waiting risks allowing your conspirators time to attempt rescue. 3 days. She had 3 days left to live. They dragged her to a washing room where rough hands scrubbed the worst of the filth from her skin and hair. They gave her a clean shift to wear white linen, the traditional garment for those about to face the headsman's blade. Then they returned her to the cell to wait for death. Lyra spent those 3 days in a haze of disbelief and terror. She'd had a hard life, yes, but she'd never imagined it would end this way. Executed for a crime she didn't commit, with no one to speak for her, no one to mourn her passing. On the final night, she barely slept. Through the small, barred window, high in her cell, she could see the moon rising full and luminous. It seemed to pulse with light, and Lyra found herself transfixed by it, unable to look away. "I'm innocent. If there are any gods listening, any spirits who care about truth, I'm innocent." The moon offered no answer. Dawn came too quickly. The guards arrived with first light, unlocking her cell and binding her wrists with rough rope that bit into skin still tender from the manacles. They led her up from the dungeon through corridors she'd once walked freely and out into the estate's main courtyard. A crowd had already gathered. Hundreds of people, nobles and commoners alike packed into the space to witness justice being served. A wooden platform had been erected in the center, raised 4 feet above the ground, so everyone could see the moment when an Omega's life ended to satisfy the territory's need for blood. Lyra's legs nearly gave out when she saw the execution block waiting at the platform's center. They hauled her up the wooden steps. The morning sun was bright, almost blinding after days in darkness, and she had to squint against it. She could see faces in the crowd, some angry, some curious, some merely bored. To them, she was entertainment, a cautionary tale, a break in their daily routine. The executioner stood to one side, a massive man in a dark hood. But it wasn't him who held the ceremonial sword. AlphaKing Thornwood stood at the platform's edge, and even in her terror, Lyra couldn't help but take in the sight of him. He was exactly as the servants' gossip had always described. Tall and powerfully built, with shoulder-length dark hair pulled back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite in exhaustion. Steel-gray eyes that had seen too much death. He wore black leather and furs despite the warm morning, the silver wolf insignia of the royal house prominent on his chest. This was the man who would take her life. A priest stepped forward to offer final rites, his voice droning through prayers Lyra barely heard. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might tear free from her chest. The crowd grew quiet, waiting. Kael ascended the platform, the ceremonial blade held in both hands. Up close, she could see the battle scars on his face, the weariness in his eyes. This was a man who'd seen too much death, done too many hard things, and now he would kill her too. His voice carried across the silent courtyard, formal and cold. Lyra Hayes of No House, you have been found guilty of the murder of Beta Marcus Chen, trusted advisor to the crown. Have you any final words? She should beg. She should plead. She should throw herself at his feet and sob for mercy. But Lyra had spent 3 years making herself small and invisible, and she was so tired of it. If she was going to die, she would die with whatever dignity remained to her. Yes, I have words. The crowd's murmur died completely, every eye fixed on her, every ear straining to hear what the condemned girl might say. I'm innocent. Marcus Chen was dying when I found him. I tried to save him, and for that I'll die. The real killer is in this crowd, watching, probably pleased with how perfectly his plan worked. Her eyes swept the assembled faces and found him. A man with wavy brown hair and an expensive velvet doublet standing at the back with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The false priest. She met his gaze and saw satisfaction there, confirmation that she'd been nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. And when you realize your mistake, Alpha Thornwood, I hope it haunts you. Something flickered in Kael's expression. Surprise perhaps at her composure. Or maybe just impatience to be done with this unpleasant duty. Kneel. Lyra knelt, her bound hands clasped before her. From this angle, she could see the false priest more clearly, could see the way he leaned forward in anticipation. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. He'd planned this. All of it. The timing, the evidence, the execution date scheduled specifically for the full moon. Kael raised the blade. Lyra closed her eyes, waiting for the blow that would end everything. And then the moon, still visible in the bright morning sky, broke through the clouds. The moonlight struck Lyra's upturned face like a physical blow. It shouldn't have been possible. The moon was barely visible in daylight, a pale ghost against the blue. But in that moment, it blazed with sudden intensity, sending a beam of silver-white light directly onto the execution platform. The light touched her skin, and everything changed. Heat flooded through her body, starting at her face and spreading outward in waves. Not painful exactly, but overwhelming, as if something dormant deep within her cells had suddenly awakened and was fighting its way to the surface. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and the crowd's hostile faces blurred into meaningless shapes. Her skin began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer, barely visible in the morning sun. But within seconds, the glow intensified, silver-blue light emanating from her face, her neck, her exposed arms. The bound rope at her wrist smoldered and fell away, consumed by power she didn't understand. And then the markings appeared. They materialized across her skin like ink bleeding through parchment. Intricate tribal patterns curved along her cheekbones, spiraled across her forehead, traced down her temples. Ancient symbols that looked like a language long forgotten, each line precise and deliberate as if carved by an invisible hand. The markings continued down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her white shift and wound around her arms in elegant spirals that pulsed with ethereal light. Power thrummed through her veins. Her wolf, barely a whisper of presence for her entire life, stirred for the first time with a strength that stole her breath. She'd always been weak, as shifters went barely able to sense her wolf's presence. But now it rose within her, ancient and wild, and utterly foreign. The markings burned brighter and the symbols seemed to move on her skin, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The crowd's angry murmur died instantly, replaced by shocked silence. Kale stood frozen, the ceremonial blade still raised above his head, his steel-gray eyes wide with shock. Lyra met his gaze, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. Something passed between them, recognition, though, of what neither could have said. His wolf, she realized dimly, was responding to hers. She could feel it, a presence pressing against her awareness, curious and wary, and inexplicably drawn. Then the intensity of the transformation crested, and Lyra's vision went white. The sword fell from Kale's hands, hitting the wooden platform with a ringing clang that echoed across the courtyard. The sound broke the spell of silence, and chaos erupted. People in the crowd were shouting, pointing, some dropping to their knees as if witnessing a divine revelation. Lyra swayed where she knelt, her unbound hands useless to catch herself as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was Kael reaching for her. His face transformed from executioner's cold determination to something else entirely, wonder maybe, or fear. She collapsed onto the platform and the world went dark. Kael caught her before her head could strike the wood. His hands, the same hands that had been about to end her life, cradled her with unexpected gentleness as he lowered her unconscious form to the platform. The markings were still visible on her skin, though they'd stopped glowing quite so brightly. In the full light of morning, they were unmistakable. An elderly man pushed his way through the crowd, his scholar's robes marking him as one of the estate's archives. His weathered face had gone pale, his eyes locked on the markings with an expression of awe bordering on terror. "Your Highness, those markings, I've studied the old texts my entire life. Those are the symbols of the Luna Blessed, the bloodline that was hunted to extinction 300 years ago during the Great Massacre." Kale knew the history. Every shifter did. The Luna Blessed had been a rare lineage, Omegas born with the ability to bridge the physical and spiritual realms. They'd been healers, seers, guardians of sacred spaces, and they'd been slaughtered when fear overcame reverence, when people decided such power was too dangerous to allow to exist. That's impossible. The Luna Blessed are gone. The last of them died centuries ago. Apparently not. The scholar knelt beside Lyra's unconscious form, studying the markings without touching her, as if afraid contact might burn or bless in equal measure. "These symbols cannot be faked, Your Highness. They're written in the language of the spirit realm itself, visible only on those carrying the blessed bloodline. If she bears these marks, she is Luna Blessed." Another voice joined the conversation, an aged priestess who served in the estate's temple, her milky eyes suggesting blindness but seeing far more than most. "There's more, Your Highness. Luna Blessed are incapable of taking innocent life. Their very nature prevents it. If she bears these markings, she physically could not have murdered Marcus Chen." The words hit Keiko like a blow to the chest. He'd been about to execute an innocent woman. He'd stood over her with a blade raised, ready to end her life, and she'd been innocent all along. The real killer was still out there, still free, still unpunished. He ordered the courtyard cleared, his voice cutting through the chaos with alpha authority that brooked no disobedience. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, faces pressed against windows to catch a glimpse of the unconscious woman who'd brought legends to life. Damon materialized at his elbow, expression perfectly calibrated between concern and curiosity. His brother had always been good at wearing the right face for the moment. "Brother, what's happening? I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Kael. He looked down at Lyra's peaceful face, the markings still faintly glowing on her skin, and tried to reconcile this revelation with everything he'd thought he knew. "Get the healers, and have chambers prepared in the main wing. Guarded chambers. She stays under watch until we understand what this means." Damon's voice carried just the right note of caution. "Is that wise? We don't know what she is, what she's capable of. Perhaps the dungeon would be safer. She's Luna Blessed. She's sacred. And she's innocent of Marcus's murder, which means we have a killer walking free in this estate." Kale turned to face his brother, fully searching Damon's face for something he couldn't quite name. You advised me to accelerate the execution. Why, you'd been away for weeks, brother. The estate was restless, demanding justice for Marcus's murder. I thought swift action would satisfy them, prevent any conspirators from organizing a rescue attempt. How was I to know she was anything other than what she appeared, a servant caught red-handed with a murder weapon? It was a reasonable explanation, too reasonable perhaps. But Kael's thoughts were scattered, his wolf still agitated by the woman's proximity. He couldn't think clearly, not with her unconscious form in his arms, not with those marks glowing against her pale skin. Just get the healers. They carried Lyra to chambers in the royal wing rooms that had housed visiting dignitaries and honored guests. She was neither of those things, but she was something more important, a living mystery that might hold answers to Marcus's murder, a sacred being that legend claimed had vanished from the world centuries ago. Kale watched the healers work over her unconscious form, checking vital signs and murmuring to each other about the unprecedented nature of her condition. He should leave, should attend to the dozens of urgent matters that always demanded an alpha's attention. Instead, he stood at the window watching the moonlight that shouldn't have been visible at midday fade back into ordinary sky. His wolf had recognized something in her, had strained toward her with an intensity that left him shaken. That shouldn't have been possible. He was the alpha, the most powerful shifter in the territory, and he'd never had such a visceral reaction to anyone. The mystery of Lyra Hayes had just become considerably more complicated. And somewhere in Thornwood Estate, Marcus Chen's real killer was still breathing, still plotting, still believing they'd gotten away with murder. Kale's hand went to the pendant he wore beneath his shirt, a gift from Marcus years ago before the world had gotten so complicated. He'd failed his mentor once already by nearly killing an innocent woman. He wouldn't fail him again by letting the real murderer escape justice. 3 days passed in a haze of discovery and disbelief. Lyra woke in chambers so luxurious they felt like mockery silk sheets against skins still marked by dungeon filth, tall windows overlooking gardens she'd once tended from the shadows. The morning sun streamed through glass so clean it seemed invisible, and for several disoriented heartbeats, she thought perhaps death had come after all, and this was some strange afterlife. Then she saw her arms. The markings remained etched into her skin like tattoos painted by divine hands. Silver blue symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, ancient writing in a language she'd never studied, but somehow felt she could almost read. They glowed faintly in the morning light, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. A knock at the door made her flinch. Before she could respond, it opened and Kale Thornwood stepped inside. He looked different without the ceremonial executioner's blade in his hands. Still powerful, still radiating alpha authority that made the air feel heavier, but there was something in his steel gray eyes that hadn't been there on the platform. Uncertainty, perhaps, or guilt. Lyra scrambled out of bed, servant instincts taking over. She tried to bow, tried to make herself small and invisible the way she'd been trained. Her legs gave out halfway through the motion. Kale crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her before she hit the floor. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, electric, unexpected, profound, in ways that made no sense. Their eyes met and held, and Lyra felt something click into place deep in her chest like a lock recognizing its key. He stepped back quickly, his jaw tight. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body needs time to recover from whatever happened on that platform. What did happen? That's what we were trying to understand. He gestured to the chairs by the window, an invitation rather than a command. Lyra moved slowly, her muscles protesting each step. Everything felt different now. Sharper, more vivid, as if someone had removed a veil she hadn't known was there. She could hear conversations 3 floors below, could smell the bread baking in kitchens, half the estate away, could feel beige emotions bleeding through the walls like heat from a fire. Kyle poured water from a crystal pitcher, handed her the glass. His fingers didn't quite touch hers, but she felt the warmth of his skin anyway, felt something deeper. Anxiety, determination, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. How did you do that? Do what? I can feel what you're feeling, your emotions. They're like colors in my mind. Yours are dark blue shot through with red. The blue is worry, the red is anger. Kyle's expression didn't change, but she felt his surprise anyway, sharp and sudden. The scholars will want to hear about that. They've been researching your markings since you collapsed. And what did they find? That you're something the world hasn't seen in 300 years. The door opened again and a small procession entered. An elderly man in scholar's robes, his weathered face kind but intense with curiosity. A blind priestess whose milky eyes seemed to see more than most people's functional ones. And a woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked hair and practical clothing who moved with quiet competence and studied Lyra with an expression that mixed hope with old grief. The scholar spoke first, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime with ancient texts. My lady, I am Scholar Pemberton. These markings you bear identify you as Luna, blessed a bloodline we believed had been completely eradicated during the Great Massacre 3 centuries ago. Lyra touched the markings on her face, tracing patterns that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. What does that mean, Luna blessed? The priestess stepped forward, her blind eyes somehow finding Lyra's face with unnerving accuracy. You are a bridge between our physical world and the spiritual realm. Your kind once served as healers, seers, guardians of places where the veil between worlds grows thin. You can sense truth, heal wounds that should be fatal, find sacred spaces hidden from ordinary eyes. But most importantly, Scholar Pemberton continued, Luna blessed are physically incapable of taking innocent life. Your very nature prevents it. If you had truly murdered Marcus Chen, your markings would have burned away the instant you struck. The implications crashed over Lyra like a wave. She'd been telling the truth all along, not that her truth had mattered before she could prove it written on her skin. Then who killed him? That's what we intend to find out. The older woman finally spoke, her voice carrying an authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with lived experience. My name is Eleanor Gray. I'm the head healer here at Thornwood Estate, and I need to show you something. Eleanor pulled up her sleeves, revealing her forearms. The skin there was covered in the scar tissue, deliberate burn marks that formed intricate patterns, the ghost of something that had once been beautiful. I was Luna Blessed once. When I was 12 years old, my markings appeared during a fever. My parents were terrified. The persecution was still recent memory, then the fear still fresh. They used silver chains heated in fire to burn the markings away. It nearly killed me, but it worked. I've hidden what I am for 56 years. Lyra stared at the scars, horror and recognition warring in her chest. Eleanor had survived by destroying part of herself, had lived more than half a century pretending to be something she wasn't just to stay alive. Why tell me this now? Because you need training. Your powers are awakening, but uncontrolled. Without guidance, you'll be overwhelmed by everything you can suddenly sense. And because, Eleanor's voice softened, because I'm tired of hiding. You've done what I never could, stood in front of the whole territory with your markings blazing and survived. Maybe times have changed enough that we don't have to hide anymore. Kale had been silent through these revelations, but now he spoke, his alpha voice carrying weight that made everyone in the room straighten instinctively. There's another matter we need to address. Marcus came to you before he died, Eleanor. What did he tell you? Eleanor's expression grew grave. He'd found references in the old archives to an artifact called the Crystal of Binding, created by the first Luna Blessed to stabilize mate bonds, to protect them from corruption and outside interference. Marcus believes someone was actively searching for it. Why would anyone want that? Because in the wrong hands, the crystal could do the opposite of its intended purpose. Instead of strengthening bonds, it could break them, could allow someone to steal power from mated pairs to corrupt the very foundations of Pax structure. The implications were staggering. Lyra's mind raced, connecting pieces she hadn't known existed until this moment. Marcus was killed to stop him from revealing this, and I was framed for specific reasons. Kyle leaned forward, his full attention focused on her with an intensity that made her skin warm. What reasons? The false priest who visited me in the dungeon. He asked very specific questions about what Marcus said before he died, about sacred places and crystals. He was testing to see if Marcus had told me anything important before he died. What false priest? A man came to my cell on the third day, said he was offering spiritual comfort, but everything about him felt wrong. He wore expensive cologne, too expensive for a traveling priest. And the way he questioned me wasn't about my soul at all. He wanted information. Eleanor's face had gone pale. Luna Blessed can sense sacred places, including where powerful artifacts like the Crystal of Binding might be hidden. Whoever killed Marcus needed to know if you were truly Luna Blessed. The only way to reveal our nature is through extreme stress under a full moon's light. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. They set up my execution specifically to expose what I am. If I died, I wasn't Luna Blessed and they'd keep searching. If the markings appeared, they'd know I could help them find the crystal. Which means, Kale said quietly, his jaw tight with controlled fury, whoever orchestrated this has access to ancient knowledge, the authority to plant evidence in Marcus's chambers, and the power to manipulate execution timing. That narrows our suspects considerably. Lyra felt something dark coiling in her stomach. Suspicion dread the terrible understanding that the killer wasn't some outside force but someone inside these walls, someone with power and privilege, enough to orchestrate murder and walk away clean. What do we do now? Kale stood, his entire bearing shifting from tense revelation to decisive action. Eleanor will teach you to control your abilities. You're clearly being overwhelmed by the sensory input. And he paused, something complicated flickering across his face. I need to investigate my brother. The words hung in the air like poison. Scholar Pemberton and the priestess made hasty excuses and left understanding that some conversations required privacy. Eleanor remained, her scarred arms crossed, her expression sympathetic but unsurprised. Damon pushed for the accelerated execution. Kale continued, his voice flat, in the way of men trying to contain emotion through sheer force of will. He had access to Marcus's chambers. He's been studying Luna Blessed history in the archives for months. And when your markings appeared for just a moment before he schooled his expression, he looked satisfied. You can't want to believe it's him. Of course I don't want to believe it. He's my brother. We've ruled this territory together since our parents died. We've fought side by side, bled together, built everything we have through shared sacrifice. Kale moved to the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against morning light. But I almost executed you because I trusted his counsel. If I'm wrong about him, I need to know. And if I'm right, his hands clenched into fists, then I need proof solid enough that no one can deny it. Lyra stood, slowly crossing to where he stood. She didn't touch him, but she wanted to felt an inexplicable urge to offer comfort to the man who'd been ready to end her life days ago. Then we find proof, together. Kale turned to look at her, surprise evident in his eyes. You want to help investigate after everything that's happened to you? Marcus died in my arms trying to warn me about something. Someone framed me for his murder and would have let me die for it. You're absolutely right, I want to help investigate. Something shifted in Kale's expression, respect perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Eleanor will teach you control. I'll teach you investigation. And we'll find out who's really responsible for Marcus's death. The training began immediately. Eleanor was a patient but demanding teacher, pushing Lyra to build mental walls against the overwhelming flood of sensory input. The first lesson involved Lyra sitting in meditative silence while Eleanor described visualization techniques. Your mind is a room. Right now, every door and window stands wide open. Every sound, every emotion, every heartbeat within half a mile pours in without filter. You need to learn how to close those openings to control what you allow inside. Lyra closed her eyes and tried to visualize the room Eleanor described. Stone walls thick and strong. Heavy wooden doors with iron locks. Windows with shutters that could block out unwanted light. Start with the guards outside your door. Can you feel them? She could. Two presences, bored and slightly nervous, standing at attention in the hallway beyond. She could feel their surface thoughts, like radio frequencies. One worrying about a sick child at home, the other mentally composing a letter to a lover he hadn't seen in weeks. Now build a wall between you and them. Imagine the stone rising brick by brick until you can't sense them anymore. It was harder than it sounded. Her awareness kept slipping around the wall she tried to construct, finding gaps she hadn't sealed properly. But gradually, with Eleanor's patient guidance, the presences faded to whispers, then to nothing. When Lyra opened her eyes, the relief was profound enough to bring tears. It's quieter. Oh gods, it's so much quieter. Good. Hold that wall. We'll practice expanding and contracting your shields until you can control exactly what you sense and when. Over the following days, Lyra learned to manipulate her new abilities with increasing precision. She practiced truth sensing on willing servants, learning to read the minute physical tells that accompanied lies, elevated heart rate, microscopic facial movements, the biochemical changes that happen when someone tried to deceive. She discovered she could sense emotional bonds between people, seeing them as threads of light, connecting souls that had chosen each other. And she healed her first wound. A kitchen boy had sliced his hand badly on a knife, the cut deep enough to require stitches and leave a permanent scar. Eleanor brought him to Lyra's chambers for practice. The boy was terrified, his eyes wide, as he stared at the glowing markings on Lyra's face. "I won't hurt you. I promise, show off Basu." She placed her hands over his wound, not quite touching the bleeding flesh. Her markings began to glow brighter golden light emanating from her palms. She felt the injury as if it were her own, the severed vessels, the damaged tissue, the pain signals firing along neural pathways. And then she felt how to fix it. Power flowed through her hands like water from a spring. The flesh began to knit back together, vessels reconnecting skin, sealing over the wound. Within moments, only a thin pink line remained where the gash had been. The kitchen boy stared at his hand in wonder, flexing his fingers experimentally. "It doesn't hurt anymore. It doesn't hurt at all." After he left, Lyra sat trembling with exhaustion. The healing had drained her more than she'd expected, left her feeling hollowed out and brittle. "It gets easier with practice," Eleanor assured her. "Your body will build stamina for channeling that much power, but you'll always need to be careful. Healing takes something from you to give to someone else. Use it too freely and you'll burn yourself out." While Eleanor taught her control over Luna-blessed abilities, Kael taught her the art of investigation. He brought her into Marcus's chambers, now cleaned of blood, but still sealed as a crime scene. Together, they examined every detail, looking for what the initial investigation had missed. "Tell me what you sense." Lyra extended her awareness carefully, maintaining the shields Eleanor had taught her, while allowing just enough perception through to gather information. The room still held echoes of violence, fear, and pain, and desperate determination, overlaying everything like a stain that couldn't be fully scrubbed away. Marcus was afraid, but he was also resolved. He knew he was walking into danger. He'd made peace with the possibility of death. He was a warrior. He wouldn't have been easy to kill, even caught off guard. Lyra moved through the room, her fingers trailing just above surfaces without quite touching them. Near the bookshelf, something caught her attention, a presence that had been here recently, leaving traces in the air like perfume. That smell, expensive cologne and fine leather. I remember it from the murder scene, but I didn't realize until now that it means something. Kael's expression grew grim. That combination narrows things considerably. Expensive cologne is custom made for wealthy clients only, and quality leather clothing is reserved for the highest nobility. Could rebels or outside assassins afford those things? Unlikely. This was someone inside the estate, someone with money and status. They searched the bookshelves next, and Lyra noticed a gap where a volume had been removed. The books on either side were thick with dust, but the space between them was clean evidence something had been taken recently. What book was here? Kael checked the library records, his face growing progressively darker as he read. Legends of the Luna Blessed, a historical account, checked out 2 months ago by Prince Damon. The words hung heavy between them. Circumstantial, not definitive, but adding to the growing pile of evidence, pointing in one terrible direction. We need more than suspicions and cologne. I know, which is why we're going to set a trap. The plan formed over the following week. Lyra would stage a vision. Luna Blessed were supposed to have prophetic dreams about sacred places after all. She would claim to have seen the location of the crystal of binding in one of these visions, and do so publicly enough that whoever was searching for it would be forced to act. The opportunity came during a council meeting. Lyra had been invited to attend as an observer, her new status as Luna Blessed, giving her nominal authority, even if her actual power was still undefined. She sat beside Eleanor, watching the nobles debate security measures in the wake of Marcus's murder. Damon was there, of course. He looked every inch the concerned prince, expensive burgundy velvet, his cologne noticeable even across the large room, his expression attentive and grave. When their eyes met, he smiled warmly, and Lyra felt absolutely nothing from him. It was like looking at a beautifully painted wall, decorative but without depth or genuine emotion behind it. Halfway through a discussion about border patrols, Lyra stood abruptly. She let her shields drop just enough to be overwhelmed by the sensory input, gasping as a flood of emotions and heartbeats crashed over her. Her markings began to glow visible, even in the bright afternoon light streaming through the council chamber's tall windows. Eleanor grabbed her arm with convincing alarm. "Lyra, what's wrong?" "I see it. I can see." Her voice shifted to something distant and strange, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. The crystal, northward 3 days' ride. The ruins where the first Luna Blessed fell. Clearwater Valley. The old sanctuary still stands hidden by magic that parts only for our kind. The crystal calls to me. It wants to be found. She let her legs give out, collapsing with Eleanor catching her before she hit the marble floor. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Damon's reaction. His body had gone rigid, every muscle tense, and in his eyes blazed naked hunger before he controlled his expression. The council erupted into concerned chaos. Lyra kept her eyes mostly closed, her breathing shallow, while servants rushed forward with water and smelling salts. Kael's voice cut through the noise. "Everyone out. She needs space." The nobles filed out reluctantly, throwing curious glances over their shoulders. Damon lingered near the door, ostensibly concerned, but clearly thinking hard about what he'd just witnessed. "Brother, should we send a scouting party if what she saw is real?" "No one goes anywhere until she's recovered enough to guide us herself." Dismissed. After the chamber cleared except for Kael, Eleanor, and a few trusted guards, Lyra sat up. Her performance had achieved exactly what they'd hoped. Damon now believed he knew where to find the crystal, and his carefully controlled mask had slipped just enough to confirm what they'd all been suspecting. "He'll move quickly now," Eleanor said quietly. "He'll try to reach the ruins before any official expedition can be organized." Kael nodded grimly. "We leave tonight. Small group guards, I trust, absolutely. We need to get to those ruins before my brother does." "There's just one problem," Lyra said slowly. "I made up the location. I have no idea if there's actually anything in Clearwater Valley." Eleanor's expression was unreadable. "The old texts do mention a sanctuary there. It was one of the last Luna Blessed strongholds before the massacre. Whether the crystal is actually hidden there," she shrugged, "we'll find out together." They departed at midnight under a waning moon. Kael, Lyra, Eleanor, and 6 guards whose loyalty was beyond question. Iris Blackwood rode with them, as well Kael's former lover, now one of his most trusted advisors, despite the complicated history between them. She'd initially viewed Lyra with obvious jealousy, but something had shifted after the council chamber performance. "That was impressive acting," Iris said as they rode through darkness, their horses' hooves muffled by careful wrapping. "I almost believed you were actually having a vision." "Thanks, I think. Fair warning, though, if you hurt him, I'll make you regret it. Doesn't matter if you're Luna Blessed or sacred or whatever, he's been through enough." Lyra glanced at Kyle, riding ahead, his broad shoulders tense with worry and determination. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want the truth about who killed Marcus." "And what do you feel for Kyle?" The question caught Lyra off guard. What did she feel? Gratitude. Certainly he'd stopped the execution, given her sanctuary believed her innocence. But there was something else too. Something that sparked whenever they touched, whenever their eyes met across a room. "I don't know him well enough to feel anything beyond gratitude. But when he touches me, something sparks. I don't understand it." Iris's laugh was bad. "Of course, the sacred mate bond. I could never compete with that." "I don't even know what that means." "It means you're destined for him. It means I'm just history, a footnote in whatever grand romance the universe has planned for you two." Before Lyra could respond, Iris spurred her horse forward, leaving Lyra to ride in uncomfortable silence. The journey north took them through increasingly wild terrain, cultivated fields giving way to dense forest, the smell of civilization replaced by pine and earth, and the particular stillness of places humans rarely visited. On the second night, Kael appeared at Lyra's tent. "Can't sleep. Too much thinking." He settled beside her at the small fire, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, far enough to maintain proper distance. "What are you thinking about?" "About how a month ago my biggest worry was whether the head cook would yell at me for burning the bread. Now I'm Luna Blessed, hunting for a mythical artifact, investigating a murder that almost got me executed. It's a lot to process. Do you hate what you've become? Lyra considered the question seriously. I hate that I didn't get to choose. But the power itself, it's terrifying and amazing at the same time. I can feel things I never knew existed. Connections between people, the way souls recognize each other. Like what you feel between us. The question hung in the air between them, intimate and dangerous. Yes. Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. I felt it too. From the moment I touched you on that platform, my wolf recognized something in you, responded in ways I don't fully understand. The scholars would say we're fated mates, two souls the universe intended to find each other. That's not possible. I'm nobody. You're the alpha. Fate doesn't care about rank. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them until Kyle finally stood to leave. Get some rest. Tomorrow we reach Clearwater Valley, and whatever we find there will change everything. He was right. The ruins materialized from morning mist like something from a dream, ancient stone structures half reclaimed by forest archways, leading nowhere, the bones of what had once been a magnificent temple. Lyra felt the pull immediately, like invisible strings attached to her chest, drawing her toward the sanctuary's heart. It's real, there's something here. I can feel it calling. They dismounted and approached on foot, weapons drawn despite the apparent abandonment. The ruins were eerily silent. No birds, no insects, no sound except their own breathing and the whisper of wind through empty doorways. Lyra led them deeper into the complex, following the pull that grew stronger with each step. In the center of what had once been the main temple, she found stairs leading down into darkness. The others hesitated, but she descended without fear, her markings providing faint illumination in the underground dark. The chamber at the bottom was circular, an impossible moonlight filtered through from above, despite them being 20 feet underground, despite it being midday on the surface. In the chamber's center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a crystal the size of a man's fist, pulsing with amethyst in silver light. Gods above, Eleanor breathed. It's actually real. Before anyone could touch it, voices echoed from above. Familiar voices. Well, well, brother, you're predictable as always. Damon stood at the top of the stairs, 30 armed men spread out behind him, blocking any escape. His expression had changed, the concerned prince replaced by something harder. Colder, finally honest in its naked ambition. Let me guess. You figured out I killed Marcus. Set this up as a trap. Clever. Except now you're cornered underground with a no escape, and I have all the leverage. Kale's hand moved to his sword. This ends now, Damon. Last chance to surrender. Surrender, brother? I haven't even begun. That crystal is going to give me everything I've been working toward for 5 years. Everything you've always had, but never earned a respect. Power people actually listening when I speak. He started down the stairs, his men following in a wall of steel and hostile intent. I don't want to kill you, Kale. I never did. But I will if you force my hand. Now step aside and let the Luna Blessed bring me my crystal. The underground chamber filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Damon's men formed a semicircle at the base of the stairs, cutting off any hope of retreat. 30 armed soldiers against Kyle's small group of 8. The math was brutally clear. Lyra stepped forward, positioning herself between the crystal and Damon's advancing forces. Her markings began to glow brighter in response to her elevated heartbeat, casting dancing shadows across ancient stone walls. You killed Marcus. You framed me. You orchestrated everything from the beginning. Damon's smile was almost admiring. Guilty on all counts, though I prefer to think of it as strategic planning rather than orchestration. Marcus discovered my research into the crystal. He was going to tell Kale, warn him about my ambitions. I couldn't allow that. And you, he gestured at her glowing markings, were the perfect solution. I suspected you might be Luna Blessed. Your grandmother's reputation for herbal remedies, the way you seemed to sense emotions despite being completely untrained, it was worth testing my theory. By having me executed, by creating circumstances that would force your awakening. If you were Luna Blessed, the mortal terror combined with full moonlight would trigger your markings. If you weren't, well, one dead Omega seemed a reasonable price for certainty. The casual cruelty in his voice made Lyra's stomach turn. She'd been nothing but a test subject to him, her life worth risking on a hypothesis. Kale moved to stand beside her, his alpha presence radiating protective fury that filled the chamber like heat from a furnace. You're my brother. We built this territory together after our parents died. How could you betray everything we've fought for? Something flickered across Damon's face. Genuine emotion breaking through the calculated mask. Pain, resentment, years of accumulated bitterness, finally given voice. Brother, you want to talk about brotherhood? Do you remember what Father said at your coronation when everyone was celebrating the new Alpha King? Kale's jaw tightened. Damon. He said you were born for leadership, that you'd be a great alpha. And when someone asked about me, about what role I'd play in this glorious future, do you know what he said? The question hung in the air, rhetorical and poisonous. He said, I would support you, that supporting you was my purpose. Not leading, not shining, not being anything except your shadow. I've spent 30 years living in that shadow, brother. Making the hard decisions you were too noble to make. Fixing your mistakes. Building this territory while you played benevolent ruler and took all the credit. Eleanor's voice cut through the charged silence, sharp with understanding and zero sympathy. So you murdered an innocent man and framed a girl for execution because your feelings were hurt. That's pathetic, Damon. His eyes went cold. Oh, me down. You wouldn't understand. You've been hiding what you are for 50 years, burning away your own power to stay invisible. At least I have the courage to take what I deserve. By stealing it through betrayal and murder. By using the tools available to me, the crystal will let me break Kyle's mate bonds, siphon his alpha strength. Then we'll see who's truly fit to rule. Kale's hand moved to his sword, but Lyra felt through their growing connection that he was stalling, trying to find some way to reach the brother he'd once known. It doesn't have to be this way. We can still. It's too late for reconciliation. Too late for anything except what comes next. Damon's gaze fixed on Lyra with predatory focus. You're going to walk over to that pedestal and bring me the crystal. Do it now or I'll start killing your friends one by one. Lyra extended her senses, reading the bonds in the chamber with newfound clarity. Damon's men were loyal but uncertain, most following orders without understanding the larger picture. Kale's guards were prepared to fight but knew they were hopelessly outnumbered. Eleanor's determination burned like a steady flame. Iris's jealousy had transformed into fierce protectiveness. And Kale was a storm of conflicting emotions, grief and fury and desperate hope warring beneath his controlled exterior. If I bring you the crystal, you'll let them go. You have my word. Your word is worthless. Damon's expression hardened. Then let me offer better incentive. He snapped his fingers and two of his men dragged forward a prisoner Lyra hadn't noticed in the initial chaos. Thomas Reed, his face bruised and terrified, a blade pressed against his throat. Thomas, her friend from the kitchens, the only person who'd shown her kindness during her years of invisibility. Seeing him bound and frightened sent rage coursing through her veins hot enough to burn. I grabbed him from the estate before we left. Insurance in case you proved difficult. So here's the new deal. Bring me the crystal or watch your friend bleed out on these ancient stones. Lyra looked at Kyle, then Eleanor, then back to the crystal pulsing with otherworldly light behind her. Every option led to disaster. If she gave Damon the crystal, he'd have the power to reshape pack bonds, to steal strength from mated pairs, to corrupt everything Luna Blessed had created to protect. If she refused, Thomas would die and Damon would eventually find another way to take what he wanted. Unless there was a third option. She remembered the vision from when she'd first touched the crystal during their initial arrival, the ancient Luna-blessed woman standing in this very chamber 300 years ago, tears streaming down her marked face as she spoke words that had echoed across centuries. The prophecy had included instructions. A fail-safe built into the crystal's creation designed specifically for moments like this when power fell into wrong hands. All it required was a Luna-blessed willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Lyra turned to face the crystal, her decision crystallizing with the clarity of absolute certainty. She extended her awareness through her shields, touching Kyle's mind through their nascent bond. I'm going to end this. Trust me. His response came back sharp with alarm. What are you planning? Something reckless. It's apparently in my job description. Before he could protest, before anyone could stop her, Lyra placed both hands directly on the crystal surface. Power slammed into her like a physical blow. The vision returned stronger and more vivid than before. The ancient Uluna-blessed woman, her markings identical to Lyra's own, standing in this sanctuary while screams echoed from outside where her people were being slaughtered. The woman's voice resonated inside Lyra's skull. Daughter of the moon, you found what was hidden. The time has come to fulfill the prophecy written in blood and and moonlight. What do I need to do? Speak the words of willing sacrifice. Give yourself freely so the crystal's power can be distributed to all true mate bonds across the land. It will become untouchable, incorruptible, forever beyond the reach of those who would abuse its purpose. And what happens to me? The ancient Luna Blessed's expression was sorrowful. The prophecy says death, but prophecies are written by those who cannot see all possible futures. What you choose here will echo across generations. Choose wisely, daughter. Choose with your whole heart. Lyra pulled back from the vision to find chaos erupting around her. Damon was shouting orders, his men advancing. Kale was moving to intercept them, sword drawn, his face a mask of desperate determination. Eleanor and Iris had positioned themselves as a defensive line. Thomas was struggling against his captors, and the crystal beneath her hands was responding to her touch, beginning to glow brighter, recognizing Luna-blessed blood and waiting for her decision. Lyra spoke the ancient words that appeared fully formed in her mind, a language she'd never studied, but somehow understood completely. I offer my life to protect this gift. I give myself willingly so that what was meant to heal cannot be twisted to harm. Accept my sacrifice and fulfill your purpose. The crystal's light exploded outward, turning the entire chamber white. The force of it drove everyone to their knees. Damon's men, Kale's guards, everyone except Lyra, who stood at the center of the maelstrom, with her hands still pressed against pulsing crystal. She felt the power pouring through her, using her body as a conduit. It wasn't painful exactly, but overwhelming in its intensity, like being struck by lightning that lasted forever and burned away everything except the essential core of who she was. The crystal began to crack. Fissures of light spread across its surface, each fracture line blazing with amethyst and silver fire. And then it shattered, not breaking into useless shards, but transforming into thousands of glowing fragments, each one a tiny star burning with concentrated purpose. The fragments shot outward in every direction, passing through stone walls as if they didn't exist. Lyra felt each one seeking its destination, mated pairs across the territory, and beyond bonds that needed strengthening connections that had grown weak or damaged. The fragments buried themselves in the hearts of those pairs, weaving the crystal's protective power directly into their souls. She felt the distribution happening across hundreds of miles. Soldiers on the borders suddenly able to sense their distant mates with crystal clarity. Couples in villages feeling bonds snap into new strength. Children being born with the blessing of unbreakable connections already woven into their spirits. One fragment shot directly at Damon. It struck his chest and he screamed a sound of pure agony that echoed off the chamber walls. The power coursed through him, seeking a mate bond to strengthen. It found nothing except ambition and corruption. No love, no genuine connection, only the hollow space where bonds should have lived but never had. The fragment burned through him, seeking and finding nothing, and in its disappointment, it took something else instead. His wolf, the source of his shifter power, the foundation of everything he was. The fragment consumed it, leaving behind only broken emptiness. Damon collapsed to the floor, his screams dying to whimpers. My wolf, I can't feel my wolf. What did you do? What did you do? Lyra barely heard him. She was falling now, the last of the crystal's power flowing through her, taking something essential with it. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled, her body suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. The chamber was collapsing around them, the ancient magic that had preserved it for 3 centuries, finally failing now that the crystal's power had dispersed. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground. She felt his arms around her, felt his desperate fear through their bond, felt him shouting something she couldn't quite hear over the roaring in her ears. Her vision was fading, darkness creeping in from the edges. But her markings were changing. The silver-blue light was shifting to pure gold, brighter than before, pulsing with warmth that spread from her skin into her bones. Eleanor's face appeared above her weathered features, creased with shock and wonder. Impossible. The sacrifice should have killed her. That's what the old texts say, willing sacrifice means death. Then why isn't she dead? Kale's voice was raw with panic and hope in equal measure. Look at the markings. They're not fading, they're transforming. gold instead of silver. I've never seen anything like this. Through her fading consciousness, Lyra felt the change happening inside her. The crystal hadn't taken her life. It had transformed it, reshaped it, made her into something new. She was no longer just Luna blessed. She was the keeper of bonds, the living embodiment of what the crystal had been created to protect. The fragment that had distributed itself across thousands of mated pairs had kept one piece back. That fragment now lived in her chest, right over her heart, a permanent connection to every bond she'd just strengthened. She could sense them all, thousands of golden threads spreading across the territory like an enormous web with her at its center. And one thread burned brighter than all the others. The bond between her and Kyle formed through healing and strengthened through the crystal's final gift. It was unbreakable now, permanent, the kind of mate bond that legends spoke about, but few ever experienced. She tried to speak, but her vocal cords wouldn't cooperate. Instead, she reached up and touched Kyle's face, letting him feel through their bond what she couldn't put into words. I'm alive. I'm changed, but I'm alive. His relief crashed over her like a wave so intense it threatened to drag her under. Don't you ever do anything that reckless again. Can't promise that. Being reckless seems to be my specialty now. The chamber was definitely collapsing. Massive stones fell from the ceiling, crashing into the floor with impacts that shook the ground. Kale scooped Lyra into his arms and ran for the stairs, the others streaming behind him. Damon's men had already fled, abandoning their broken leader in their panic to escape. Damon himself lay curled on the floor, hands pressed against his chest, where the wolf should have been keening with loss that transcended physical pain. Kale hesitated, looking back at the brother who'd betrayed him, who'd murdered Marcus and framed Lyra, and orchestrated everything out of wounded pride and desperate ambition. Eleanor grabbed his arm. We need to go. Now. I can't just leave him to die. Why not? He would have killed all of us without hesitation. But Kyle was already moving back, already hauling Damon to his feet, despite the younger man's dead weight. Some bonds ran deeper than betrayal, apparently. Some obligations transcended even attempted fratricide. They burst from the underground chamber just as the ceiling fully collapsed behind them. The entire sanctuary was falling, ancient magic finally releasing its hold after 3 centuries of preservation. Stone rained down around them as they ran through the ruins, dodging falling archways and collapsing walls. They made it to the forest edge as the last of the temple crumbled into rubble. Behind them, the sacred site that had stood for 1,000 years disappeared into a pile of broken stone and dust, the crystal's departure leaving nothing to sustain the protective spells that had kept it hidden. Lyra watched from Kale's arms as history erased itself, as the place where Luna Blessed had made their last stand became just another ruin in an overgrown forest. Part of her mourned the loss. But another part, the new part, the keeper of bonds part, understood that some places existed only to serve specific purposes. The sanctuary had protected the crystal for 300 years. Now its duty was complete. Damon sat apart from the group, his eyes empty, his hands still pressed against his chest as if he could somehow will his wolf back into existence through sheer desperation. Kale approached him slowly, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. Why did you do all of this? Damon looked up, and for the first time since Lyra had met him, his mask was completely gone. Beneath it was nothing but pain and regret and the terrible understanding that everything he'd sacrificed everything for was gone. Because I wanted to matter. Because I was tired of being second. Because I thought power would make people see me the way they see you. I always saw you, brother. I valued your counsel, your support, your partnership. You were never second in my eyes. But I was second in everyone else's, and I couldn't live with that anymore. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. You killed Marcus. You tried to kill Lyra. You would have destroyed thousands of mate bonds for your own ambition. I should execute you right here. Then do it. I'm already dead. A wolf without his wolf is just a human, and I can't live as a human. No, you'll live. You'll go into exile at the northern border under guard. You'll spend whatever years remain remembering exactly what your ambition cost you. And maybe eventually you'll find some kind of peace with what you've become. It was both mercy and cruelty allowing Damon to survive, but forcing him to live with the consequences of his choices. From the expression on Damon's face, death would have been kinder. But Kyle clearly wanted his brother to have time for reflection, for regret, perhaps even for eventual redemption. The journey back to Thornwood Estate took 4 days. Lyra grew stronger each day, her new abilities settling into her consciousness like old friends. She could sense every mated pair within 100 miles, could feel the strength of their bonds, could identify which connections needed healing or support. It was overwhelming at first, but Eleanor taught her to filter the input, to focus only on bonds that specifically called out for attention. Thomas rode beside her for most of the journey, his bruises fading, but his spirit remarkably intact despite the ordeal. So you're basically a living legend now. That's going to make kitchen gossip really awkward. Lyra laughed despite the exhaustion that still dragged at her bones. I don't think I'll be working in the kitchens anymore. Probably not. You'll be too busy being the alpha's mate and saving the world and all that important stuff. The casual way he said it made her blink. We're not, it's complicated. It's not that complicated. I can see the way he looks at you. Like you're the sun, and he's been living in darkness his whole life. And the way you look at him isn't exactly neutral, either. She wanted to argue, but the bond between her and Kale hummed with constant awareness. She knew where he was at every moment, could feel his emotional state, could sense when he was thinking about her. And he could feel the same from her end. They'd been permanently linked by the crystal's final gift, two souls bound together in ways that transcended normal mate bonds. When they finally arrived at Thornwood Estate, the entire territory had turned out to greet them. Word had spread about what happened at the ruins, how the Luna Blessed had sacrificed herself to distribute the crystal's power, how every mated pair in the territory had felt their bonds strengthened simultaneously, how the Keeper of Bonds had been transformed rather than destroyed. People reached out to touch Lyra as she passed, not with fear, but with reverence and gratitude. They could feel the fragment of crystal power living inside her, could sense her connection to their own bonds. She was no longer just Luna Blessed, she was something more, something the world hadn't seen before and might never see again. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment. Damon was exiled as promised, sent to live under guard at the most remote outpost Thornwood controlled. 3 more Luna Blessed awakened, 2 teenage girls and a young woman in her 20s, their markings appearing spontaneously as if the crystal's distribution had triggered something dormant in bloodlines long believed extinct. Lyra took them under her protection, immediately working with Eleanor to teach them control, to help them understand gifts that might otherwise overwhelm them. She established formal Luna Blessed sanctuary under Thornwood's protection, making it clear that anyone with the markings would be honored rather than feared. She also began holding audiences for those whose bonds needed healing. Couples who'd grown distant, pairs struggling with communication relationships damaged by outside interference, they came to her seeking guidance, and she used her new abilities to sense what was broken and suggest how to fix it. The work was exhausting and fulfilling in equal measure. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was doing something that mattered beyond simple survival. 3 months after the crystal's shattering, Kael finally asked her formally. They were in the gardens at sunset, the same gardens where she'd once worked invisible among the flowers. Now she walked through them as an equal, her golden markings visible to anyone who cared to look. There's something I need to ask you. His formal tone made her smile. You can ask me anything. Will you bond with me officially before the territory under the full moon? Will you be my mate and my queen and my partner in everything that comes next? Lyra had known the question was coming. The mate bond between them had been growing stronger every day, fed by proximity and trust and genuine affection that had developed through shared trials. What had started as supernatural attraction had become something real and chosen. Yes, but only if you understand what you're getting. And what am I getting? A woman who spent 3 years invisible and is still learning how to be seen. Someone who will probably make reckless sacrifices and drive you absolutely crazy. A Luna Blessed who comes with responsibilities and students and people constantly needing guidance. It won't be easy. Kale smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face, making him look years younger. I don't want easy. I want you. All of you, complications included. The bonding ceremony happened on the next full moon. The entire territory gathered under the stars to witness their alpha bind himself to the Luna Blessed who'd saved them all. Lyra wore white silk embroidered with silver thread, her golden markings glowing bright enough to illuminate her face. Kale stood opposite her in formal black and silver, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke ancient vows. When they marked each other with ceremonial silver paint, a wolf for her, a crescent moon for him, their bond blazed visible for everyone present to see. Golden light erupted between them, spreading outward in waves that touched every person in attendance. Those who had mates felt their own bonds strengthen in response. Those without mates felt hope that such connections existed and might one day find them too. The celebration lasted 3 days, but Lyra's favorite moment came the morning after the ceremony. She woke in Kael's arms in chambers that were now officially theirs, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked territory they would rule together. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was rough with sleep and contentment. "About how a year ago I was nobody, invisible, alone, and now you're everything. To me, nay, to the territory, to every Luna blessed who will come after you." "No pressure then?" He laughed and pulled her closer. "We'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." 5 years passed in what felt like both forever and an instant. Lyra established a full Luna Blessed Academy. In the rebuilt sanctuary, 7 students, now ranging from age 10 to 50, all learning to control abilities that would have gotten them killed a generation ago. She taught them not just survival, but pride, how to stand visible in a world that had once demanded their extinction. She continued holding audiences, strengthening bonds that had grown weak, helping souls find their matches, becoming the living embodiment of what the crystal had been created to protect. The golden markings never faded, and the fragment in her chest remained a constant warm presence, connecting her to thousands of bonds across the territory and beyond. Her daughter was born on a spring morning, 3 years after the bonding ceremony. Arya came into the world with golden markings already visible on her skin, proof that the Luna-blessed bloodline wasn't just surviving but thriving. Kael wept holding her, this tiny, perfect creature who carried both their legacies forward into an uncertain future. Other Luna-blessed were discovered across different territories. Word spread of the sanctuary at Thornwood, and they came seeking training guidance community. What had once been a bloodline hunted to extinction was becoming a thriving network of gifted individuals learning to use their abilities to heal rather than hide. On Arya's 5th birthday, Lyra stood in the sanctuary's main hall teaching a class on bond sensing. Her daughter sat in the corner playing with wooden blocks, her markings glowing faintly as she unconsciously reached out to sense the emotional connections in the room. "Remember, you're not controlling people's bonds. You're helping them see what already exists. Your gift is awareness and guidance, not manipulation." The students listened intently, 10 of them now, the Luna-blessed population growing as more awakened and sought training. It was everything Lyra had dreamed of in those early terrified days after her own awakening. A messenger arrived in late afternoon with news from the northern border. Damon had died in his sleep, his human body finally giving out after 5 years of exile. There would be no elaborate funeral, no public mourning, just a quiet burial in soil far from the family plots where their parents rested. Kael took the news stoically, his grief private, but genuine. Whatever Damon had done, however he'd betrayed them, he'd still been family once. Some bonds left scars even after they shattered completely. That evening, Lyra found her mate standing alone on the balcony overlooking the territory they'd built together from the ashes of tragedy and betrayal. "You okay?" "I will be." He made his choices, lived with the consequences. Part of me hopes he found some peace at the end. Part of me hopes so too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over forests and fields that had prospered under their combined leadership. In the distance, the sanctuary's white stone gleamed in dying light, a beacon for anyone searching for belonging. "Do you ever regret it?" "Everything that happened." Lyra considered the question seriously. "I regret Marcus's death. I regret Damon's corruption. I regret the pain we all went through. But the outcome," she gestured at the territory, the sanctuary, their daughter playing inside with golden markings glowing. "No, I don't regret where we ended up. Even though you almost died. I didn't die. The crystal transformed me into something new, something needed. And along the way, I found family, purpose, love. Things I never thought someone like me could have." Kael pulled her close, and Lyra felt their bond pulse with warmth and certainty. "You were never someone like you. You were always extraordinary. The world just needed time to notice." That night, Lyra dreamed of the ancient Luna-blessed woman who'd created the crystal's final safeguard. They stood together in moonlight that existed between waking and sleeping, past and present, bleeding together. You've done well, daughter, better than I dared hope when I wove the sacrifice prophecy. You've given our people a future I thought we'd lost forever. There's still so much work to do, so many bonds to strengthen, so many Luna blessed to train. But you're not alone anymore. None of you are. That's the greatest gift you could have given our bloodline community, instead of isolation, pride instead of fear. The vision faded, but the woman's final words echoed in Lyra's mind as she woke. The moonlight revealed your truth, but you chose what to become. Never forget that, daughter. Never forget that power means nothing without the choice to use it well. Lyra lay in darkness, listening to Kyl's steady breathing beside her, feeling the warm weight of responsibility and purpose settled across her shoulders. The journey from invisible kitchen servant to keeper of bonds had been terrifying, painful, nearly fatal. But it had also been necessary for her, for the Luna blessed, for everyone whose bonds she now helped protect. She closed her eyes and extended her awareness outward, touching briefly on the thousands of connections she now shepherded. Each one a story, a choice, two souls deciding to bind themselves together despite all the ways the world might tear them apart. And at the center of them all, her own bond with Kyl burned bright as proof that even the most unlikely connections could become unbreakable, given time and trust and willingness to be seen. The moon had revealed what she was, but she'd chosen what to become. And that choice, made freely in a collapsing sanctuary with everything on the line, had changed the world forever.